In ancient times, the Himalayan region now called Bhutan was described by many names. Tibetan chronicles speak of Loman, literally means southern darkness, and Monyu, which means dark land. These early accounts even mention Lomon Tsendenjong, meaning sandalwood country, and Lomon Hashi, which translate to Southern Mon of four approaches, which reflects the land's forests and geography. When Europeans first mapped the region, they borrowed these terms. An 18th century map labels it Lomon as dark southland, Lo Tsendenjong as southland of the Cyprus, Loman Hazi as southland of four approaches, and Lomenjong as southland of herbs. Each name paints a picture of steep valleys and dense forests far to the south of Tibet. The first Western visitors added their own names. In 1627, Portuguese Jesuits Estevão Castella and João Cabral met Bhutan's ruler and recorded the country as ANTI-PIRACY and Potente, while noting locals simply called the region Mon, a Tibetan term for southern tribes. These exotic terms and the confusion between Bhutan and Tibet show how little outsiders understood Bhutan then. It was only in the late 17th century that Bhutan began to be seen as a separate kingdom. These early names set the stage for later linguistic interpretations. Linguists from the Indian subcontinent offered Sanskrit-based explanations for Bhutan. A popular theory is that it comes from Sanskrit Bhut-ant, meaning end of Bhota, with Bhota being Tibet. This makes sense, as Bhutan lies at the southern end of the Tibetan plateau. Another Sanskrit suggestion is Bu-utan as high land, fitting the kingdom's towering terrain. Over time, such terms passed into neighboring languages. For example, Nepali, a Sanskrit-derived language, recorded the name as Bhutan. In modern Indian pronunciation, it often became Bhutan, echoing those ancient roots. Scholars also note that the core of Bhutan derives from the Tibetan word bed for Tibet. In local speech, bod became Bota, and adding tan, akin to the stan, in Hindustan, yields the sense land of the Tibetans. In other words, early Sanskrit-influenced names and Nepali usage emphasize Bhutan's position at the edge of the Tibetan world. These Indian or Sanskrit perspectives gave a learned flavor to the name before Europeans arrived. For centuries, Tibetans lumped Bhutan's mountains and people together with their own southern Mon tribes. In fact, European explorers noted that maps before the 1770s often used Bhutan and Tibet interchangeably, unaware that Bhutan was a distinct Drukpa kingdom. Tibetan Buddhists spread their faith into Bhutan early on, but culturally the valley states were long seen as part of Greater Tibet. The split became clear only with outsiders' help. In 1774 to 1775, Scottish emissary George Bogle journeyed through Bhutan and learned from Tibetan officials that the Deb Raja's land was a separate country. In his report, Bogle wrote,
"This country, which I shall distinguish by the name of Bhutan, finally separating Bhutan from Tibet.
This was the first time a European clearly identified Bhutan as the Drukpa kingdom. Until then, names like Bhutan on European maps really meant Tibet itself. Bogo's discovery shifted Western understanding, and thereafter, Bhutan was no longer seen as just Tibet's end, but as its own kingdom. By colonial times, the name Bhutan had largely solidified through British influence. One scholar bluntly calls the modern name a British legacy born of ignorance about the Himalayan foothills. After Bogo's report, British cartographers fixed the realm as a country called Bhutan. In 1777, mapmaker James Renault drew Bhutan on his charts. Over the 19th century, as the East India Company negotiated treaties with the Bhutanese, Bhutan, an Indianized spelling, became standard in English records. The British generally pronounced it Bhutan, while Indians said Bhutan. But the spelling Bhutan took hold internationally. Throughout this time, the Bhutanese themselves mostly continued to call their land Druk Yu. In Western archives and government papers, however, Bhutan was now the fixed name for the kingdom, a label set down by maps and treaties far from its valleys. To the Bhutanese, the country's true name is Druk Yu, the land of the thunder dragon. Since the 17th century, Bhutan's own royal title and chronicles have used this name. The dragon symbol comes from the Drukpa Buddhist tradition, from the outside world's view of a mysterious southern darkness to the scholarly descriptions in Sanskrit, and from the mapped borders drawn by neighbors to the people's own name. Druk-yu, the simple word Bhutan, holds all these stories together. It is a single name transcribed from many voices,